All right, good evening. So Justin's going to be flipping slides for me, so bear with us here. Um, Tonight's presentation has to do with data and the training that our department has gone through over time, and then specifically zeroed in on some recent training that we have done. I do want to kind of preface this with that um, I fully expect a lot of questions out of the data that we present tonight, and I think there's opportunity to dig, of course, deeper into the data, and would certainly entertain any of those questions, and maybe even have to loop back at a later meeting with some of that follow-up. So, Justin, if we could go to the next slide. So the first part of this quick presentation is I just want to kind of go back all the way to basics and talk about the training that our police officers go through. Every police officer in the state of Michigan has to be certified by MCOLS, or the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, which is the state organization that certifies or licenses, if you will, police officers. You don't get to be a licensed police officer or a certified officer without going through a basic police academy. And you can see that they're about 15 to 17 weeks in length. Primarily, most of the officers that we have, our police department, have gone through a regional law enforcement academy. So think LCC's Police Academy, Lansing Community College's Police Academy. There's several of them throughout the state, but there's also a track program through a few four-year universities where individuals can go through a bachelor's degree program, and at the end of their schooling in their senior year, they go through a police academy as well. And when they graduate with their four-year degree, they're also graduating as an academy graduate and can earn their state certification that way. We do have some officers that have gone through that track program. So once an officer comes out of the police academy, they're hired on by any number of police departments. And here at East Lansing, we have a field training program that lasts for about 4 to 6 months, depending on how quickly the officer progresses through that field training. At its very most basic, the field training lasts for 50 days. There's 20 DORs, or 20 daily observation reports that an officer has to do, both on the day shift, and then they do another 20 on the night shift. After those 40 are completed, the officer has the option to go through a handful of review days where they get to basically ask any question of their training officer that comes to mind, because they're kind of going into what we call the shadow period, but it's really your final exam. Your final shadow period is 7 days in length, and you're expected to perform the job of a solo patrol police officer. Your field training officer is sitting next to you the entire time, but they're actually dressed in plain clothes. They're not identified as a police officer as much as possible, because it directs the trainee to have to deal with everything. They're in full uniform, fully recognized as a police officer. During this field training program, you're constantly being evaluated. Every single day, every single thing that you do, your field training officer writes down every call you go on, every traffic stop you make, and evaluates you on the standards that are built into the program. You have to progress through the program at a satisfactory rate and perform at a skill level that is deemed accessible or acceptable by the program. If you don't, there are some options. The program really is designed to train people. It's not designed to wash people out of the program. But there are mechanisms in place to remediate individuals that are not meeting standards. There's performance improvement programs, extensions in training, those types of things that can occur. And at the end of the day, if they don't meet those standards, if they can't make it through the PIP or the performance improvement program, or if they can't make it through the extension of training, they can be dismissed from employment at the police department. And that does happen occasionally. I do want to point out that just because someone makes it through their 4 to 6 months of training, doesn't mean that we don't further evaluate them. On a monthly basis for their first year and their first year probationary period, they are re-evaluated by both the training officers and then also the training sergeant or the training lieutenant. Up until that 1 year expires, they are on probation with the police department. And if they're not meeting standards, they can be dismissed from employment. And then, just to talk a little bit further in depth about the field training program, there's 48 individual training tasks that the officers have to go through during those 50 days or those 600 plus hours of training. And that's just the actual tasks that we've identified are, critical and core to a police officer's performance. From there, the officers have practical performance things that they have to do. Performing out on the street, interacting with individuals, interacting with their peers, things that can't necessarily be captured in a written document or a training task. Can we go to the next slide? Once an officer is past their first year of training, everyone has to go through annual in-service training. And these are done in various formats. For a little while, we were doing annual in-service training for a week at a time in the winter. That has morphed over time, but these are the topics that we do in-service training on. Legal update, both from the Ingham County prosecutor's perspective for state law and case law update, but also from the city attorney's perspective as well for ordinance updates and things that they are identifying as local issues that our officers have to be brought up to speed on. We train on special populations, how to interact and how to work with special populations. One of the things—
we have a freeze.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay, yeah, for me,
Yes,
it broke up just for
you.
a second there, but you're fine now.
Okay, I apologize. One of the things that we do is we train on special populations, how to interact with special populations, how to work with people from special populations. For example, most recently, during our in-service week, we trained on law enforcement's interaction with people with autism. And, that's obviously a very important topic because we have to tailor our approach to how we interact with those individuals quite differently from the general population as well. We do some basic things like first aid, CPR, vehicle operation, and then of course de-escalation. We up until this year we had one de-escalation trainer on staff. We recently, back in August, sent 3 additional officers through de-escalation training so that we can increase our ability to continually evolve our de-escalation program and intermix that with our response to resistance program as well in scenario-based training. And then we also have some special topics that will come in. Everything from officer health and wellness to mental health issues. Sometimes we have our department chaplains come in and talk about topics such as delivering death notifications and things like that. So we identify special topics throughout the year that we need to bring into our training program to round that out. Can we go to the next slide? So I want to hit particularly on our use of force program. We currently run anywhere from 4 to 5 in-service days a year of use of force training. When I started back in 1997, use of force training was highly focused on just standing on the firing line and using our firearms. That has evolved into defensive tactics, intermediate control devices, so tasers, and then making sure that we recertify our officers on an annual basis on all of those items, whether it's pepper spray, a taser, your firearm, or defensive tactics, your personal defensive tactics. We have to certify on each year, and we make sure that the officers do that. One of the things that we have done most recently over the last 2 years is we have integrated many of these in-service use of force days to scenario-based training. So the officers engage in a scenario with actors, and they have to incorporate their de-escalation training, their interpersonal skills, their use of force skills. And based on how the officer acts, there is a script that goes with that scenario that says, If the officer is not doing a good job with their de-escalation, or if they're actually escalating the scenario, the actor is going to respond appropriately. And so, it gives us an opportunity to kind of have that comprehensive training atmosphere where they can bring all their skills to the table and try to employ them in as close to real world situations as possible. Next slide. This slide here really focuses on our diversity and cultural awareness training that we have done since 2016. And if you look down towards the bottom of the slide, there is a breakout, just for context, of some of the schools that we have done since July of 2020 for fiscal year 21. So on the right-hand side, you can see how many individuals have gone through that particular school or training session, whether all sworn, meaning our entire department has gone through it, or some of these schools are individual schools that we have sent, 1, 2, 3, 4 officers to receive training. One of the things I want to highlight is our proctored tour, Ferris State University Jim Crow Museum. This is an impactful school for me personally, and I always kind of highlight on it because it really resonated with me in my personal life. But what this training does is it takes the officers out of the classroom, and we're not just sitting there listening to a PowerPoint. We're not just listening to a facilitator or an instructor speak, but it allows the officer to go through a proctored tour of this museum and, see, touch, and, really feel what the goal of this training is to do. This particular one shows the history of racism and how it impacts law enforcement and intersects with law enforcement throughout our nation's history. We've had some officers go through there that, they come back and they'll tell you, holy cow, that was really beneficial. That was impactful for me. So I like to highlight that one because it is out of the norm of sitting in a classroom and listening to an instructor teach you on something. Another one that I want to hit, down on the bottom there, you'll see that we have one individual, one of our police sergeants, is going through a 10-month academic-based program to get a certificate in diversity leadership. This is a program that we've never done before, and we hope that this will be kind of the impetus for us to be able to bring a lot of training back to our agency from the inside. This individual will be able to develop training programs and hopefully intersect with some of the training that the city organization as a whole is doing, so that we have our own instructor in-house and we don't have to send people out to different schools. Next slide. Of course, I'm not going to go through this entire list with you, but it is in the agenda packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions about specific schools here. But these are just some of the individual training schools that we've sent officers to throughout calendar year 2020 to date. And I put this up here to demonstrate the breadth of schools that we have to send officers to. Everything from honor guard school, FOIA training, to social networking. And then you can see, just the variety of types of schools that we send officers to, because we have to have officers go to not just employee developmental training, but also training that is, core and basic to their job. So, for instance, you have to certify in running the radar for traffic enforcement. A-RIDE is a school that deals with drunk driving. So you have to, be able to train in those specific core areas as well. Go to the next slide. So next thing I want to do is move into the data points. These are the things that I think we'll certainly generate some questions, and I'm happy to bring more information back at further meetings based on this presentation as well. So a couple of the things that we're going to talk about, or a few of the things that we're going to talk about here, are listed there for you. We're going to talk about the officer-initiated contact report, our arrest, race, and ethnicity report, our staff demographics, staffing level trends, and then our calls for service and traffic stop trends over the past 3 years. So we began tracking officer-initiated contacts back in February of 2020. This was not a new approach for us. A long time ago, probably, I'm going to guess anywhere from 15 to 20 years ago. The chief could correct me if I'm wrong on that. We did track demographics on all of our traffic stops. That effort stopped at one point in time, and we reinitiated that at council's direction back in February of 2020. What an officer-initiated contact is, it's any law enforcement contact that an officer has with an individual that they initiated themselves. It's not contact where someone calls 911 and an officer responds to a call and ends up contacting an individual. It's a traffic stop. It's a situation where an officer sees an individual walking down the street and they stop to talk to them for some reason. It's anything that the officer self-initiates outside of being sent on a call. We update these numbers monthly, and we try to post these stats to the city's website under the police department page on a regular basis. And if I can have Justin switch to the contact report. There we go. You can scroll through this report. It is updated through the end of September. There is one thing that I want to point out to you at. If you look at February and then look at March and then look at April, you're going to see our contacts, our officer-initiated contacts plummet. I think, there's no secret there. Back in March, COVID hit, everything went into lockdown, and we went to a really kind of a protection mode for our staff. So we told our officers, you need to be very careful and very selective in when you're contacting people at your own, on your own initiative, because we don't want them getting sick. We all saw back in April and May what happened to some of the agencies down in Southeast Michigan, and then of course throughout the nation, where there were 20, 30, 40% of police officers out sick simply because of COVID exposures, COVID illnesses, and the like. And when you look at our staffing levels, we have 51 police officers. That could wipe out our entire police department. We are not unique in this. Many of the agencies in Ingham County all switched to this model of very limited officer contacts during COVID, to the point where we actually had a contingency plan of if multiple agencies experienced widespread illnesses, how would we help each other and police each other's jurisdictions. You can see the categories on the left. Those are categories that are placed there within the officer's computer system that they have to input these numbers on. And one of the things I want to point out is the officers have to input these numbers into the system when they make the contact. They cannot submit their daily or the report, which is also tied to their payroll. They cannot submit this report without completely filling out all of the boxes, the drop-down boxes that show up on the screen when they submit this information. Justin, can you scroll all the way down to September? So if you look, the numbers are so small. I'd be remiss if I wouldn't mention that, some of the numbers are so small that we have to talk about the statistical accuracy of these, in a larger sense. But you can see in September of 2020, contacts are coming back up as we contact more people, and the officers have more infrastructure, if you will, to be able to do these types of officer-initiated contacts safely. Can we flip back to the slides? The next thing I'll go on to is our race and ethnicity report. This report is built for us by the state police through our computer system, the records management system that tracks all of our arrests, police reports, that type of stuff. And the way I did this to present this to you today is I broke it out in part 1 crimes, part 2 crimes, and then court-ordered arrests. And you can see the list there of what a Part 1 and a Part 2 crime is. If you think about Part 1 crimes as the crimes that we as an agency have to report to the state and then are reported back further on to the federal level, that's a Part 1 crime. The one thing I do want to point out, though, is that a Part 1 crime, when I think of it and when a lot of people think of it, we immediately think it's a homicide, it's a sexual assault, a robbery, serious felony crimes. That's not always the case. You look at the larcenies, a larceny from a vehicle, a larceny, from a purse or a retail fraud or even a identity theft could be, depending on the situation, could be categorized as a Part 1 crime. And we certainly experience a lot of those. We do experience a lot of larceny type crimes and frauds. Part 2 crimes, think of local ordinances for lack of a better term. Those are our disorderly conducts, our ordinance offenses, driving offenses, some drug-related offenses as well. And then our court-ordered arrests, those are arrest warrants, whether it's a bench warrant, a probation violation, a misdemeanor warrant, or a failure to appear in court. Those are the orders to arrest that come down from the judge that our officers have zero discretion on. A court order is a court order, and the officers are directed to arrest individuals on those orders. So can we scroll to the next slide? This is what our 3-year trend for Part 1 crimes look like. I'm not gonna, read off all of the data on here, but you can see the categories here that the officers have to input into their report. And again, this is built for us by the state police. It is far from perfect, if you ask me. There's a lot of opportunity to dig further into this data, if you will. One of the questions that always comes up, I think, is, what is an unknown category? Well, the officers are relying on their own observations, sometimes their own conversations with individuals to identify what race that person may be. And sometimes the officer just is not comfortable assigning a race to an individual or an ethnicity to an individual because they simply don't know. I always use myself as an example for this because my last name is Gonzalez. But if you look at me, if an officer does not know me, an officer is not going to know that my ethnicity is Mexican. My dad's family immigrated from Mexico back in the 1920s. And so, sometimes officers are not comfortable asking these questions to an individual. And, they might feel more comfortable just checking the unknown box. And I think there's an opportunity to really get that unknown section down to zero, through training and more experience with some of these issues for officers. We can go to the next slide. The next slide is Part 2 crimes. Exact same thing, 3-year trend, same categories, and that's what our trends look like. Then we can go to the court-ordered crimes as well. Same thing, 3-year trend, same categories, and you can see the data there in front of you. Okay, next slide. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, all these slides, if I haven't mentioned this, I think I already mentioned it, it is in the agenda packet, so you have a hard copy with you or for you there. Staff demographics, sworn police officers and civilian staff. Right now, in-house, from Chief Johnson on down to the brand new officer, we have 51 police officers. We have 26 civilian staff. Civilian staff includes jail service officers, PACE officers, cadets, records clerks, administrative assistants. Those types of positions are considered civilian staff. What is not included on the civilian staff side, I should mention, are our crossing guards. We do employ anywhere from 10 to 15 crossing guards during the school year, and they're part-time, very part-time contingent employees that, of course, are only employed during the school year and very limited hours throughout the day. But you can see our breakdown of sworn police officers and our civilian staff there, and the percentages. We have 5 African-American police officers, just actually under 10% when you look at the percentage, 37 white officers. We have 5 Latino officers, 1 Pacific Islander, 1 Middle Eastern American individual, and then 1 or 2 Asian officers. And then you can take a look, and down below I've broken out our male versus female percentages. And one thing I do want to point out is, if I'm not mistaken, I believe right now the national average in male, or national average for female officers is about 15%. So we are above that level just by a bit. The next slide. So our department structure, just to kind of give you a little bit of context of where our individuals are working, where our police officers are working. We have a patrol division, investigations, and administration. And you can see who is assigned to each section. We have 2 lieutenants and 6 sergeants. Those are our supervisors on the shifts. We have a lieutenant and 3 sergeants on each shift, both our day shift and our night shift. And then we have 32 police officers on each, or on patrol. We try to break them up evenly between days and nights. So we may have 16 and 16 police officers on patrol when we are fully staffed. And then we have 7 cadets. Those are non-sworn individuals that work our front desk for us. You can see in investigations, we only have 4 detectives, 1 lieutenant, and 1 administrative assistant. And then you can see our breakdown for our administrative section as well. Next slide. This is our department structure when it really focuses on civilian staff. We have our PACE division, which has 1 police sergeant in it. We have 1 administrative section and 7 non-sworn PACE officers. Our jail service officers, we have 6 right now. That is not full staff. I think we are full staffed at 7 jail service officers. Some of those individuals are full-time and some are part-time positions. And then in records, we have a sergeant and 3 records clerks. The clerks are non-sworn. Next slide. Coming online, and we've been working through the background and final interview process for these positions, is our Community Assistance and Proactive Services Unit, the CAPS program. This is what was introduced by Mr. Lahanis back in the summer as part of our revisioning of the police department. We are currently in the process of, or the final processes of hiring 2 police social workers. Those are going to be full-time positions, non-sworn, of course. And then we are going to be hiring 4 part-time neighborhood resource specialists, again, non-sworn positions. So those numbers will add into our civilian staff once they are actually onboarded and full employees. Next slide. The next couple slides are just a couple trends for calls for service. You can see that our calls for service, and when I say calls for service, that's everything from somebody picking up the phone and dialing 911 for a true emergency, to someone calling and saying my car was broken into, or we've even had calls where an animal gets into somebody's house. The typical, there's a bat in my house, can you come help me? Those are captured as calls for service. Everything that comes into the dispatch center is a call for service. And you can see that they are trending down slightly from 2017 to 2019. But over time, that is our rough average of how many calls we respond to in a given calendar year. We can go to the next slide with traffic stops. Those are our traffic stop trends. And again, that's exactly what it is. Every time a car is stopped, those are the numbers that we have seen. I will tell you, 2020, you just saw the officer initiated contact report, is going to be way down, because of the COVID precautions. So, and the next slide, questions. And I think I saw a couple questions in the chat, but I will.
Deputy Chief Gonzalez, it's kind of really up to you. I know we have